Then. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. Greetings and regards from the land of Lord Jagannath. Let me be the first one to greet you and invite you to this interesting session, which has been titled as Managing the Dropping and the Dropped. This is essentially concerning a disruption or a whirlwind intraoperative incident. The 26 microns thick barrier between the anterior and the posterior segments, when it breaks during the course of our surgery, the possibilities that it can lead us to, and the fact that wherever the whirlwind and how intense it is, there's always a way around, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. That essentially what we are discussing in the next 85 minutes or so. Joining me to discuss all that is our star panelist, Dr. Saravanan, Head of Vitreoretina Services, Aravind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore. We also have the company of Dr. Manmat Das, Vitreoretina Services, KIMS, Bhubaneswar. We have the company of Dr. Sangamitra Kanungo, Vitreoretina Services, Carvision Eye Hospital, Bhubaneswar. And maybe the only cuckoo in the crow's nest, me, Dr. Anurag, who belongs to the other part of the ophthalmic surgeons group, the anterior segment surgeon, who would be taking the proceedings through as much as I can. So starting the boat afloat and trying to sell, the first speaker in the session would be myself, and I would be taking you through the first 10 minutes or so. And we would be discussing in that course what to do to prevent that eventuality of dropping something into the posterior segment. The topic has been titled aptly, as suggested by Dr. Sangamitra, a stitch at 9 in time saves 9. What it means basically is, this is a proverb, an old saying in Brit's world, and what it means essentially is, if you try to stitch a smaller gap that has been produced in a fabric or on a piece of cloth, it might just save you the labor of stitching or putting in more stitches later on. So it will thereby save you the extra labor required for its management later on. I'll not go into the virtually time-consuming, and if I might add, audaciously, the boring aspect of going through it again and again. There are things you need, there are things you have to have at bay. I just precisely concise it. There are a few prerequisites on the surgeon's front, and there are also a few prerequisites that should be there in the OT available to you, which should allow you to breathe easy. The prerequisites from the surgeon's end would be absolute focus. The attention should be undivided. The suspicions should be of highest degree, because sometimes the cataracts, the nuclei are very dense. So to see through a posterior capsular rupture through those nuclear substances might be difficult. So suspicion also has to be high, and you always have to be alert. And the recognition has to be instant, because the earlier it is recognized, diagnosed, the earlier you have a swing around. On the trolley, you need to have a few things. These are absolute life-saving things. A dispersive viscoelastic, which spreads itself and produces a capsular bandage on which you can do your maneuvers. Sharp and new vitrectomy cutters, 23, 25, whatever gauge you use, whatever that comes with the assembly of your phaco machine. And a multi-piece intraocular lens, which is a must-have in the armamentarium of the anterior segment surgeon whenever he proceeds to do a cataract surgery. So let's go straight into 3 different situations that I've had over the period of time. I've just selected 3 situations wherein I had the scenario of a posterior capsular rupture early, and how did I save myself and save the day for myself and my retina colleague in Dr. Sangamitra to an extent. I'm not saying that I'm always successful, but I was successful in 3 of these incidents at least. So this first case belongs to a relatively young individual, high myopic, and an extremely leathery cataract. So I go about chopping the nucleus by burying the phaco tip into the substance. I do manage to horizontally chop the nucleus into 2 different fragments. The primary chop is complete. And when I go to the secondary chops and divide the quadrants, look at how leathery it is, how much of pressure I have to put on the nuclear substance to split it into 2. But I do manage to crack it open. At least 2 heminuclei are produced. But at then the same time, keep an eye on this proximal segment of the nucleus. While I proceed with the nuclear chops, you will see that the proximal segment is trying to disappear under the iris. Look at that. It's trying to disappear under the iris. That's the first sign that something's wrong there. I recognize it, but I continue chopping because at the process of chopping, I wish to see whether the posterior capsule is intact on the far end or not. To my pleasure, I see that the posterior capsule is actually intact on that side. But the proximal segment is beginning to get lost, so I stop there. I just push the nucleus a little far, push in some viscoelastic. That's something we must do. That's a rule of thumb. Before withdrawing the phaco needle, the anterior chamber has to be filled with profuse amount of viscoelastics. And then I dislodge the proximal segment, bring it up, coat the posterior capsule with dispersive viscoelastic, and on top of that, I continue the phacoemulsification process. I do have one complete heminucleus down below, so I do have support for my PC. I'm not touching it again. So I continue phacoemulsifying the remainder. Only when I come to the last piece, I stop, put in a multi-piece IOL, which will be used as a scaffold, put it in the sulcus. I have enough visibility to engage the nucleus, to engage the IOL properly, dial it into the sulcus. Now I can comfortably, over the support of the IOL optic, finish off the remainder of the nuclear fragment, emulsify it, and then possibly do a bit of vitrectomy, remove the epinuclear plate that's remaining. I have to remind myself all the time there's a very high myopics, the vitreous is liquefied. So if I falter anywhere and there is an opening, the vitreous might just leak and come up and thrust the IOL. So this is the end of the case, and the patient did very well post-operatively. So this was situation one. The other situation came in where in a bright sunny morning, a patient walked into my chamber with a total mature cataract in one eye. Pretty routine, there was nothing to worry. Till I saw a warning signal come in when I examined the other eye to find a posterior polar cataract there. Interested, I subjected this patient to an anterior segment OCT, which revealed the posterior capsule already being open with the PPC. So what do? I construct a large CCC here. The reason for that is I wanted to have a larger opening of the anterior capsule because after a minimal hydrodissection, I wanted to prolapse the nucleus into the anterior chamber and with profuse viscoelastic support, chop the nucleus into 2 fragments first. Why I wanted to chop that into 2 fragments first is because I cannot see anything down below. So I push the 2 fragments onto both sides so that I have a corridor of visibility here, which is transmitting broad daylight. And through that corridor of visibility, I put in the multi-piece IOL to act as a scaffold. Now, the difference here is I do not push it in all the way. I keep one haptic on the surface of the iris because I don't know where it would be going because I don't have that much visibility here. I coat the endothelium once again with dispersive viscoelastic, profuse amount of it, and start chopping. I have the optic support now, so I'm safe. I'm sure that the fragments are not dropping any further. I finish it off. Now I have a large chunk of epinuclear plate behind the IOL, but I don't want to do vitrectomy right now because it might drop. So I use the optic edge to nudge the epinucleus plate on top of it. So it comes atop, and then I consume it through bimanual irrigation aspiration. Now is the time when the IOL can be dialed into the sulcus. And then the opening of the posterior polar cataract can be converted into a regular opening by a microrhexis forceps, minimal vitrectomy. We have not disturbed the anterior hyaloid face much here. And then finally, the IOL can be positioned to be centered perfectly right in the middle. And we can close the case here. After doing so many maneuvers in the anterior chamber virtually, because of the fact that we have used copious amounts of dispersive viscoelastic to coat the endothelium, you would see in the photograph that follows, on the first post-operative day itself, the cornea looks pristine and the vision was very good as well. That concludes the second situation where you have a pre-existing PC defect. How do you go about it? The third case is rather interesting. This was another patient who had a routine cataract. There was no history of trauma, nothing revealed with anterior segment OCT and the other modalities of investigation, including a ray tracing biometry. This patient chose femtolaser cataract surgery. So this patient has already been femtoed. By the time the patient was brought into the OT, the pupil had constricted. So after opening the main section, we pick up the action by putting in a bit of adrenaline to dilate the pupil. Now you see the pupil starting to get dilated. And the moment I start injecting visco, I take the visco cannula in. To my surprise, I see this is what's in there. The whole back complex is subluxated. I try to do a minimal hydro, try to manually rotate the nucleus a bit because I wanted to have some space to put in my CTR to carry on. But as you can see, this is very mobile, the capsule. I do successfully put in a CTR, but this case would require 2 Ahmed segments on both sides. But my experience with 2 segments is so bad in the past few years. They just don't stay with the ninoprolene sutures that we use to stabilize them. I try to win over my luck for the day, try to nudge into the nuclear substance a little bit, try to separate them, try to consume the pieces. But I soon realized that this is too mobile a piece. Even if I do some heroics and put in the IOL, it's not going to stay perhaps. So I have to take another measure. I decide for that very soon, leave the case there without trying further. Look at that subluxation. Go to the superior end, inject some lignocaine, perform a sclerocorneal section. Easily the nucleus pops up with the entire bag and CTR complex. I remove it. No trauma induced to the eye. Do some vitrectomy. Put in some pilocarpine. Manually irritate the iris so that the pupil comes down. Now, my method of secondary IOL has been many over the years, but right now I am zeroing in on the iris claw IOL. This has worked very, very well in my hands, at least in the last few years. So this is the posterior fixation technique of the iris claw IOL. Very easy, short, not at all time taking. Just nudge the iris tissue into the clip and there it goes. So one side done, go to the other side. The pupil looks very good, it's round, regular, right in the middle. And you can do a PI too, but the optic is so small in dimension, it normally does not cause a pupillary block post-operatively. The stability of the lens can be judged by the fact that I did a vitrectomy on the superior front where the pupil is peaking slightly, but there's nothing to worry. This is the first post-op day the patient had 6x6 uncorrected. So there are many methods by which you can escape the virtually inevitable. However, we will see a lot of those other secondary IOL techniques later on during Manmat's talks and the others. But this is what I had to share. A stitch in time saves 9. So that's where I conclude. We would essentially take up discussion at the end of our talks, but I would just, since we have finished a little ahead in time and get started in time as well, we'd just like to have quick comments from all 3 of you before we proceed to Dr. Sanghamitra Kanungo's talk. So starting with Sarvanan sir. Sir, would you like to say something? Just as an intro.
Very well. I'm not an anti-segment surgeon, but very well managed cases. Suppose in cases where the iris is either injured due to excessive manipulation during surgery or because of a prehistory of trauma, would you make any adjustments to fix your this iris claw lens?
Certainly, sir.
Iris, do you make any?
Not an adjustment as far as the technique of tucking the iris is concerned, but yes, if the iris is injured already, or there's a hole, or there's a tonically dilated pupil, I would certainly do pupilloplasty to bring the pupillary size down. That is certainly something I would do, because whatever happens, the edge glare, if we leave the edge of the optic exposed, then the patient's going to come back to us with horrific complaints of edge glare. So yes, what you're saying is right. I would certainly repair the iris in the same setting, along with putting the IOL in.
Yeah.
Right. Manmat, Dr. Sanghamitra, anything to say before we go on?
Yeah, what is the minimum size of the pupil that you would suggest to go for a iris claw IOL?
Well, the optic size is not, it's around 5 to 5.5 millimeters. That depends on the company from which you're ordering it. There are many manufacturers, but the one that I use comes from IOC, and it's a very good IOL in terms of stability. The clip is excellent. It just holds the iris tissue and does not injure the posterior surface. You don't have too much of pigment dispersion as well. So that has an optic size of 5.5. So obviously the pupil size has to be below that. No questions asked. That's the reason why you should always put in PILO and see that the pupil is regular and round and central for you to proceed. Otherwise, it would be a better idea to wait and refer the patient to someone who's doing secondary IOLs, or if you yourself are doing it, then you can jolly well go ahead. Manmat? You're muted, Manmat.
It's okay. Nicely managed this. Yes. We can go ahead.
I don't have an answer for that.
Right.
Is there something
Thank you so
else I
much, lady and gentlemen. So the second speaker for the session would be Dr. Sanghamitra, my colleague, Vitreoretina Services, Carvision Eye Hospital, Bhubaneswar, and she is going to talk to us on saving the Titanic. If, despite of all the measures that we just discussed, if the nucleus starts sinking or shows evidence of sinking, what are you going to do about it? Dr. Sanghamitra, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Anurag. After those mind-blowing videos, let us move to see what happens if the nucleus sinks. How do we manage it? So when should you start worrying? So as we all know, the rate of retained lens fragment is 0.1 to 1.5% depending upon the experience of the surgeon. It has been suggested that less than 25% of the retained nucleus may be observed indefinitely and may not need any surgical intervention. Nonetheless, any amount that causes a reaction, it's better to be attended to. A reaction to the retained lens fragment usually starts 24 hours to 14 days post-surgery. You need to worry when there is uveitis or vitritis with pain and decreased vision. There is an uncontrolled IOP in spite of all treatment, a cystoid macular edema leading to decreased vision, corneal decompensation, or it is associated with a retinal detachment. The causes of retinal detachment may be an aggressive attempt to retrieve the posteriorly displaced nucleus, the use of phaco probe in the formed vitreous, copious vitreous irrigation with balanced salt solution, a deep posterior vitrectomy through the limbal incision, or a vitreous traction on the peripheral retina during the fragmentation or vitrectomy. So what are the different methods by which we can retrieve or retrieve the nucleus? One is by the cutter, the 20 gauge or the 23 gauge. You might also use a 25 or a 27, but becomes very difficult because the bore of the cutters are very small. Phaco fragmenter, that's commonly used. You can remove it through the anterior segment also, or use perfluorocarbon liquid to float the nucleus top and then remove it through the anterior segment. Whichever method it may be, the things to be remembered is first do a core vitrectomy. Do a vitrectomy around the nuclear matter, free the nucleus, induce a PVD if it is not there. The nucleus is usually, it's always cut in the mid-periphery and can be supported by the light probe. You may inject PFCL bubble to protect the macula in case of a very hard nucleus when it starts splitting. The periphery should be thoroughly inspected for cortical and nuclear fragments. Now let us go to each of the examples. Now this is nucleus that was cut by the cutter. First, the steps of the core vitrectomy is completed. The surrounding vitreous around the nucleus is cleared. Any loose cortical matter can be taken out with the cutter itself. One thing is to be remembered that the cutting rate while you are doing the nuclear fragmentation and all, it should be less. The cutting should be less and the aspiration can be increased. Here I have used a bit of a PFCL bubble to protect the posterior segment, posterior pole. But usually this is not done. You may not do it because it sometimes so happens that these nuclear fragments get nudged in the peripheral part of the PFCL and it becomes very difficult to take them out. Perfluorocarbon liquids have been suggested as a useful adjunct, though it's especially used in bullous detachment and a giant retinal tear. Perfluorocarbon liquids can be of assistance in holding back the larger pieces of the lens when they are removed. And it should be thoroughly taken out after doing the complete procedure. With the phacofragmenter, again, the initial steps of the surgery remains the same with the core vitrectomy, and vitrectomy around the vitreous is completely cleared around the nucleus. If one is not able to locate the vitreous or see the vitreous, one may use a use tricot to stain the vitreous and then do cut it properly. If there is no PVD, you should do a PVD induction, clear of the vitreous. So actually the fragmentum is a 20 gauge. So if you're using 25 gauge and all, you have to remove it, increase the port size and then go with the fragmenter. The fragmentation is always done in the midvitreous cavity. With suction, you take the fragment to the midvitreous cavity. You can support it with the light probe and then do the fragmentation. While doing fragmentation, never push when you're picking up the fragments near the retina. Just suck it and get it to the midvitreous cavity. Never push it. You might injure the retina in those cases. In the third case, it was a total nucleus drop in a diabetic patient where already the anterior segment surgeon had put the IOL in the sulcus. Now you try to remove all the cortical vitreous that are there first, such that your visibility is proper. Then again, you do a core vitrectomy, again, clear off the vitreous surrounding the nucleus, induce a PVD. If it is not there, I usually do a vitrectomy around the fragmental site also and the ports wherever we are injecting any light pipe or the cutter. And always try to irrigate the fragmenter site because sometimes it causes burn, the scleral burn. The nucleus is picked up with suction to the midvitreous cavity. It is nudged along with the light pipe. Sometimes you can break the nucleus into halves along with the light pipe, pressing in each both the sides like a sandwich method. Each of the fragments are got to the midvitreous cavity, and then phaco power is used. Usually I use a suction about 300 millimeters and a phaco power about 50 to 70% phaco power. Then the peripheral vitreous is always checked. The periphery is always checked for any cortical or the vitreous fragment that may be nudged in the peripheral vitreous, or any iatrogenic holes that you may have created during the induction of PVD. Now, after vitreous removal, the fragmenter with a suction pressure of approximately 200 millimeter set to a low phaco power is used. To minimize retinal trauma, suction is applied directly over the particle while being careful not to touch or put any pressure on the particle. Use suction alone, the particle is maneuvered into the midvitreous. Then fragmentation should be kept to the minimum because a high fragmentation power may result in a forceful expulsion of the nucleus particle against the retina. And if it's a hard nucleus, it might cause retinal damage. Now, this is a video wherein the nucleus is delivered through the anterior segment. The initial steps remains the same. It was a small nuclear fragment, but very hard. My sister had forgotten to sterilize the fragmenter that day. So I was forced to take it out through the anterior segment because it could not be taken out with the 25 gauge cutter. So again, after finishing the vitrectomy, with the help of a cutter, I was sucked in the nuclear fragment, got it just behind the iris. Then irrigation with the anterior segment was copiously filled with viscoelastic. the fragment was got to the anterior chamber with the help of a dialer. As you can see, almost was 1/4 the size of the nucleus, but was very hard. Then again, viscoelastic was put to protect the endothelium. And then with a sandwich technique using a vectus and a dialer, I took out the nuclear fragment. This technique is usually not done until in a dire situation because this causes a lot of endothelial damage. Sorry. So a word about timing of vitrectomy for retained lens fragments after cataract surgery. There have been multiple studies and almost all have come to a similar conclusion that patients undergoing early or late vitrectomy almost have the same results. But everybody would prefer a same-day surgery when feasible, which would mitigate a patient dissatisfaction, prevent the need for a second procedure and hasten visual recovery, prevent complication. So my take-home message would be never try to fish out the nucleus. If the nuclear fragment is large, if you are doing a lensectomy, do it or refer to a vitreoretinal surgeon for a lensectomy and a IOL placement. If it cannot be done the same day, use proper medication to control the complications. Always clear the nucleus from the surrounding vitreous first while the removal. Induce a PVD, always suck the nucleus to the mid-periphery and then use a fragmenter. Do definitely check the periphery for any nuclear fragment or iatrogenic hole that has been caused in the due process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanghamitra, for a comprehensive presentation on exactly the points that we wanted to hear from you. I think you mentioned that there are a lot of things that you do try. There are a lot of things you do not try. What you did not mention is you also should try not to curse the anterior segment surgeon who has landed you up in that soup.
Definitely one person, because they are the bread and butter at this time.
Then I must take pride that out of the 3 or 4 surgeries that you've shown, I might have contributed to 1 or 2. I don't know. I don't have any idea about that. So we are very glad to receive Dr. Rupak. Meanwhile, thank you so much for joining us, sir. Good afternoon. And if you were there during Dr. Sanghamitra's presentation, we would like to take your inputs before proceeding, just quickly.
Yeah, very brilliant presentation, and she has outlined all the methods like using a PFCL, not using a PFCL, fragmentome, and in rare cases, in very hard nucleuses, we do have to take them out through anterior segment. So very well covered. I don't really have anything to add to this brilliant presentation.
As much as I understand retina, which is nuggets basically, but I think the most vital point that she made out was staying away from the vital tissues, pulling the nucleus up to the mid-vitreous cavity and then starting to fragment, because this is also an ultrasonic energy generating probe,
true,
right?
True.
So
otherwise we can land with large retinal breaks if you go very near and put phaco-fragmentome power. So always do whatever maneuver has to be done in the mid-vitreous cavity, yes. And rest of the surgical treatments.
Sarvanand sir, anything to add from your side?
I think nicely told about what should not be done, apart from what we do, showing what we do. As she already told, using the fragmentome power near the retina, it causes ultrasound burns to the retina, producing very large irregular breaks, which can be very difficult to manage with a lot of risk of vision loss. So that's very, in case where the nucleus is in the posterior pole, it's always safe to put a PFCL bubble, bring up the nucleus into the midvitreous and avoid ultrasound heat burns to the retina.
Dr. Sanghamitra, I've always been curious to know, this is just my curiosity more than anything else, you being an omni-segment surgeon, you do, and you're proficient with both anterior segment and posterior segment surgeries, how easy does it become for you to manage these cases, to understand the cataractous nucleus, if not anything else?
To be very frank, Dr. Anurag, I'm very comfortable with the posterior segment than the anterior segment.
That's majority. That's majority that wins for the session at least.
Anecdotal story is that when in Shankar Netralaya, Chennai, when all the VR surgeons were taught phaco, a lot of them, when they had difficulty, they used to make a rent, push the nucleus into the vitreous cavity and then
That's a very good serpiginous route. Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanghamitra and our expert panelists for your inputs. Now we move on to Dr. Manmath Das, which will be the last.
Before that, thank you very much. And I would take my leave from this session because I have to attend one more session.
Certainly, certainly.
All the best to all of all.
Yeah, with a painful heart, with a heavy heart, we have to say goodbye to the most sought after retinologist of the state, at least. Right, so the following would be the last presentation from the land of Lord Jagannath, at least. Coming in, Dr. Manmath Das, and he would speak to us on tools and steps in SFIOL. Over to you, Dr. Manmath.
Okay, so are my slides are visible?
Absolutely, they are crystal clear. Please go on.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank Dr. Anurag and Dr. Sanghamitra, as well as my good friend Rupak, for giving this opportunity. So I'll be talking on tools and steps in SFIL. I have no financial disclosures to make regarding any of the products described in this presentation. So we all know SFIL is required in cases of aphakia where there is a lack of adequate capsular support. So tools most commonly required in SFIL, apart from normal ophthalmic instruments, are suture 10 or 9 prolene. Very rarely Gore-Tex suture also used. Bent 26 gauge or 30 gauge needle and 25 gauge end grasping forceps are used, particularly in Gavor technique. Both rigid and foldable IOL can be used. Fibrin glue is used, particularly in Agarwal's variation of Gavor technique. And if you are using Yamani technique, then portable cautery is used, and Hoffman's scalpel pocket, maybe either guided ophthalmic knife or diamond knife or crescent blade is used to create a scalpel pocket. So these are 10 or 9 prolene. Most commonly, double arm straight needles are used, but we can also use one straight and one curved needle. And in vitrectomized eyes, to maintain intraocular pressure, use AC maintainer, and in non-vitrectomized eyes, we use 25 gauge infusion cannula. Sariah described use of two forceps, both curved and straight, which goes by in his name for using this sutureless SFIL. So this is a classical SFIL with a rigid PMMA IOL and with an eyelet in haptic, and this is a multi-piece foldable IOL. If you are using Gore-Tex user, then you can use 4-plate IOLs like this Bausch & Lomb Acryos IOLs also. So there are various techniques, sutured and non-sutured. Non-sutured is usually Gavor technique. So these are the most commonly techniques are used. Also, the less common technique are Yamani technique and Hoffman's scalpel pocket technique. So I will be describing the key steps of each techniques one by one. So here in the sutured SFIL technique, after the creation of partial thickness scleral flaps 180 degrees apart, the one arm of the 10 prolene needle is punctured 1.5 mm closer to the limbus and is fed into the bore of a bent 26 gauge needle introduced 1.5 mm from the limbus from the opposite end. So the needle is fed into the bore of the bent 26 gauge needle and withdrawn from the opposite side. And then through a scleral tunnel made superiorly, we have to externalize these sutures, divide the suture into two, and pass these sutures into the eyelets of the haptic. We need to actually put 5-6 throws in order to secure it tightly. Then we need to insert it and dial it accordingly. And afterwards, we have to suture at the both ends, making sure that the IOL is properly centered. Otherwise, if we pull very tightly towards the other end, the IOL may be decentered. So it should be evenly pulled on the both sides, balancing. So there will be no problem in IOL centration. So the basic essential steps are creation of scleral flaps, threading of the needle and passing to the other side, externalization of the sutures, and insertion of the IOL, and finally suturing of the 10 sutures. So the advantages is it is actually stability wise, it gives very satisfying results over the long term. But 10-0 or 9-0 sutures being very fine actually is very time consuming procedure. It involves a lot of suturing. So it's a little bit of technically challenging, and only rigid IOL can be implanted through this technique. And very lately there can be suture erosions through the scleral flaps. So Gabor Sariot, a German ophthalmologist, came with a technique which is quicker, less time consuming, and the hallmark of this technique is after the IOL haptics are externalized, it is intrasclerally tucked. So here is a case where the IOL is subluxated, so we are explanting it, and we are removing the residual part of the cortex of capsule with a cutter. IOL is explanted, and two partial thickness scleral tunnels are created parallel to the limbus in the bed of the scleral flaps. And we need to externalize the haptics of the IOL through the sclerotomy created in the scleral flaps. And after the IOL haptics are externalized, we need to tuck these haptics into the scleral tunnel created. This is the hallmark of the Sariot technique or Gabor technique. Intrascleral tucking of the IOL haptic after they are externalized. So the Agarwal's variation of this technique called glued IOL, instead of suturing these lamellar scleral flaps, we use fibrin glue, that is commonly known as glued IOL. So here we are suturing the scleral flaps by atovicryl. Instead, we can apply glue to close this. And regarding Yamane technique, Shin Yamane, Japanese ophthalmologist, his technique is also similar to Sariot. Only thing is that he uses portable cautery to create a flanges in the IOL haptic and bury these IOL haptics into the sclera. So here he is using a clear corneal incision to introduce a foldable 3-piece IOL, and with a bent 30 gauge needle punctured transconjunctivally around 2 mm closer to the limbus. Each IOL haptic tip is fed into the cavity of this 30 gauge needle. The tip of the leading haptic goes inside the bent 30 gauge needle. And using bimanually simultaneously, both the haptics are externalized. Here goes the second needle, and tip of the trailing haptic will be introduced into this cavity. And these IOL haptics are simultaneously pulled out by both hands so that they lie externally. And after externalization of the IOL haptics, portable diaphragm is applied to make flanges, and these flanges are again buried in the sclera. So intrascleral flange bury is the hallmark of this Yamane technique. So again, the scleral Hoffman scleral pocket technique is also useful, in particular in those cases where you can use one scleral pocket on the one side and on the both side also. So here I will share Dr. Pradipta Mahanta's video. So sorry, where you can see a large PCR over here and a very thin rim of capsular support in periphery. So what he is trying to do is making a clear corneal limbal incision by a crescent knife and dissecting a scleral pocket or around 3 into 3 mm towards the sclera. And then with a 10-0 needle is threaded into the IOL haptic. And through the other hand, because at this side, the IOL haptic will be supported by this capsular margin. So anterochamber maintainer is used to maintain intraocular pressure, and one arm of the straight needle of the 10-0 Prolene suture is fed into the bent 30 gauge needle, introduced 2 mm posterior to the limbus. Similarly, the same step is repeated twice, so there are 2 sutures at either end. And after the IOL is inserted, is dialed into place. And through a IOL dialer, these 2 sutures are externalized through this limbal incision, and they are sutured. So one end is secured by these sutures, and the other end is secured by this capsular flap, remaining capsular flap. So the advantages of this scleral pocket technique is no need to create any lamellar scleral flaps, no need to open the conjunctiva, etc. The results are also pretty satisfying in the post-op period. So these are my 4 techniques of SFIL. But I still use sutured SFIL, and I never use sutureless IOLs. It gives long-term results, good results in my hand. So there's my acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manmath. You can stop sharing your screen, please. So Manmath was pretty vocal in announcing that the sutured SFIL technique is his favorite. Let's see what is the favorite technique of the other 2 esteemed panelists of ours. We'll start with you, Saravanan sir.
We used to do a lot of sutured IOLs earlier, mainly using 90 Prolene. But what we realized was that after 10-15 years, we get a lot of cases where subluxation or total dislocation of the IOL in the vitreous cavity, where the suture, even though Prolene is non-absorbable, it is biodegradable. So that happens. So recently, for a few cases which we did the Gore-Tex suture. It's quite cheap, only around 1,000-2,000 rupees. You can get it from the address from any cardiothoracic surgeon who's nearby. So if you want to do a suture SFIL, I would prefer to go for a Gore-Tex, because you've seen a lot of late complications after 10-15 years of using 90 Prolene. So I would not prefer, in this day and era, I would not prefer sutured SFIL using Prolene. In case you want to go, you can go for a Gore-Tex. But Gore-Tex also has its own issues. It causes overlying scleral necrosis, exposure, all those things. It's not common, but still those things can happen. So especially in young people, children, and all these young adults, where people who are less than 50 years, I would, my choice would not be a sutured SFIL if I can get away with doing what you call intrascleral fixation, the Gabos, either one of the modifications or the original Gabos technique. So in case where the sclera is very thin, especially in like large eyes, myopic eyes, or other syndromes where you have a thin elastic sclera, so maybe in these eyes you may, I would still prefer to go for a iris cloth. But in case that also is contraindicated and you have to do only scleral fixation for whatever reason, then probably you can think about sutured IOLs. Right now, sutured IOLs is not my choice.
We'll learn about the right kind of IOL to be put in from case to case from Dr. Rupak in a while from now. But just a basic question, since Manmath concluded his talk with, and I would like to take Dr. Rupak's opinion in this first. His concluded his presentation with the explanation to Hoffman's scleral pockets. Do you ever use it for scleral fixated IOLs? We use it for a lot of other reasons, I understand, but it has its own issues. Like I think we saw in his case also that there was a profuse amount of bleed. You know, when you go translamellar, it injures the major scleral vessels, and there's a lot of bleed, and that accumulates under the conjunctiva. So what I normally do is, whenever I employ a Hoffman's pocket, I always stay in the tunnel with trypan blue so that I can see the limits and I know where to enter. But Dr. Rupak, do you ever use the Hoffman's pocket for scleral fixated IOLs?
No, I usually do not use that because of the same reason you mentioned, excessive chances of bleeding, and I'm not sure which lane I'm going. So not really, yes.
Manmath, after your exuberant presentation also, we still couldn't quite judge what is your go-to technique. So name one out of the 4 that you've mentioned.
Actually, I have always used sutured SFL. So, in fact, I have experimented one sutureless SFL, and I have used. Anyway, any technique can. I think the best technique is whatever technique you are comfortable with. So that is the best technique. So any method is okay, I think. And now, of late, actually, nowadays, a lot of people are using sutureless SFL. So somehow I was not comfortable with. So I'm still continuing. You can say,
And
quite
I have a confession to make. I tried both the Canabrava and the Yamane. It just didn't work out in my hands. I think I'm too mediocre a surgeon to try out difficult techniques like those. It just did not work out that both the haptics will be stabilized first and both of them will be pulled out at the same time.
Yes.
I just failed to find diagonally opposite points exactly at the same point of the meridian. I couldn't find it.
It looks a little bit challenging actually. Withdrawing the haptic, haptic, bilateral simultaneously.
Well, people who do them, it looks fantastic. It looks an artistic in their hands, but probably they're just too good for people like us. Right on. So moving on to the next talk, we'll have to travel a little northwards for that and catch Dr. Rupak Roy from Kolkata. And he is going to talk to us on the right kind of IOL to choose for the right kind of case. Over to you, Dr. Rupak. The podium's ready for you. Please start sharing your screen. Right, sir.
So is my slides visible?
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anurag and Dr. Sanghamitra and Dr. Manmat for inviting me in this session. My talk will have little overlap with Manmat because I'll be also basically be speaking on IOL techniques with no PC support, but I'll be talking of 1 or 2 different techniques. So basically no PC support is a situation we can have in a post-cataract complication in cases of subluxated cataracts, which I will not go into in this presentation, and late IOL dislocations and subluxations. So customized technique is needed in a case-to-case basis, in a case-to-case scenario. So we have a standard SFL which Manmat showed us very nicely, a glue dial, a Yamane's technique, and sometimes we can, I'll show in a case where we can do a bag refixation when the capsule, the PC capsule bag is subluxated. So I'll present some videos to highlight various techniques and what are the learnings to those techniques. I'll skip the SFL technique because it has been described. This is a video of a Yamane's technique. It is one of my patients. So like Manmat also, till about 1 year ago, I was very much into sutured SFLs, but of late I have been shifting towards the Yamane's technique or the interscalar haptic fixation. So as has been correctly mentioned, the key point is marking first so that they're actually at 180-degree meridians to each other, the points of entry. So this is a case which had a intraoperative complication with nucleus drop. So we did a pars plana vitrectomy, then remove the nucleus. Now first, this is the first step is insertion of the 20. We don't have 30 gauge needle and similar compatible haptics. So we are doing this with a 26 gauge needle, and this is a double-handed technique where you use forceps in one hand and to feed the haptic into the 26 gauge needle's beveled end, so that it comes out nicely from the one end of the conjunctiva. So this technique is not difficult, but yes, it has got a learning curve. It is very easy to insert the leading haptic. It is really not difficult to insert the leading haptic, but it is very challenging to insert the trailing haptic. Once the haptics are out, one has to be very careful so that it doesn't slip back again. If you have a good assistant, it is a good idea if you can ask them to hold the haptic for the time being when you are doing maneuver on the other side. Again, you enter intrasclerally, pass obliquely, then go inside the eye, And again, now little modification I do is that I don't do it the maneuver fully inside the eye. I take the 26 gauge needle outside of the eye. It is easier in my hands to insert the trailing haptic this way. You see there is a little bend in the trailing haptic, but the memory of the sensor IOL is very good. So even if you have this little bit of bend, it does not matter a lot. So now we have inserted the trailing haptic very nicely, and now the next step is relatively simple, taking out the haptics and then just cauterization and putting those haptics back in the interscleral tunnel. So this is essentially Yamenez technique, which has become my go-to technique now because it is pretty easy, looks elegant, and the IOL position is excellent post-surgery. Coming on to another case, this is a very interesting case. This kind of cases are encountered, especially if you see this is a case where you are seeing there is a subluxation. There is basically a subluxation of the intraocular lens with one side the back complex is intact, but the nasal side the back complex is not intact. It is subluxated. The technique that I use in this situation is a back fixation technique wherein I make a scleral tunnel here, and I pass a 26 gauge with the help of a ninoproline. This is the making of the tunnels. I'll skip this part. Yeah, this is an important step where we take the proline needle, and the proline suture, and this pass has to be made through the bag complex, the fibrous part of the bag where it has got a holding power. Otherwise, it is difficult for this to hold the lens in its place. The technique, the passage is similar to a SF-file technique or a railroad technique, but the difficulty here is maneuvering the needles through that capsular bag, which is very critical. And without damaging the capsular bag, you have to make a neat entry and neat exit so that this needle passes through this needle passes through the 26 gauge bevel. And here I am able to at last negotiate the needle inside, and I take it out from the. So this part is very tricky because the bag is friable, the lens is friable, and you have to keep the bag complex intact. And keeping that bag complex intact, you have to pass that needle through the 26 gauge bevel so that it goes nicely inside. I am struggling at this point in this video because I have the IOL is very fragile, and this small air bubble which sometimes happens during this sort of surgeries is keeping my visualization poor. But at last I am able to pass this and it goes out. So after I pass this, I make a double pass from the other end again. This is another needle that I have taken. This is a double arm needle. So again, I pass it, I make a neat pass again. So I have now two passes and two throws that is coming out from the nasal flap, and I am able to tie the flap nicely, and we have a centered, once we tie the IOL, you will see the lens is centered nicely and is stable. Now, this is another challenging situation where you don't have a PC and you don't have a iris also. There is a loss of iris tissue. This is a case post-trauma. You can see it's almost complete aniridia. So these are the cases which are ideal for a set of IOLs known as aniridia IOL. These are custom-made IOLs which are very important in this sort of cases, because if you put, so this is an aniridia IOL. You can see this is a custom-made IOL, have to be ordered. This is a standard SFIL technique. This is basically a SFIL technique, but one have to remember this NRAD-IL is pretty large, and it takes almost 6 to 7 millimeter incision is required to enter the NRAD-IL inside the eye. And these patients have a higher risk of corneal decompensation and IOP rise. So we have to monitor them post-operatively very closely whether they are developing any IOP high or corneal decompensation. Otherwise, the patient after the surgery, the patient is happy with their glare much less. So I have discussed few techniques, and Manmat has discussed few techniques. I think with these techniques, we can cover most of the situations where we don't have a PC support and we need to implant an IOL. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rupak. So there's at least one taker for the Yamane technique in India at least. So what I understood from your video was, of course, I was not able to do it in my practice and I tried to replicate, but what I understand is that you have to open up the IOL completely in the sulcus, and then there are a few tricks that have been outlined, like you have to have the bevel facing towards you so that the haptic can be fed into it. And it was a very interesting point that you showed that even if the haptics bent at a time, not exactly bent as in an acute angle, but it regains its loop memory. I was actually about to ask that question when Manmat was presenting. I forgot to ask at the end of his presentation. So when we are doing an SFIOL, because I've never done it, so I'm asking you people, the intrascleral tuck, while doing the handshake technique, while holding the haptic of the IOL, if the haptic is caught at an odd angle, if you're not holding the tip and you're trying to externalize the haptic, this sort of a situation is very likely to happen. It comes out with an acutely bent area at the tip. So if you come across that kind of a situation, would you still go ahead and tuck the bent part, or would you excise the bent part and cut it as straight as possible? What would you do in that kind of a situation? Sarvanan sir?
Yeah, I think as Dr. Rupak already pointed out, the foldable IOL is more forgiving in this aspect. If you are using a 3-piece PMMA IOL, the polypropylene haptic is not that very malleable. So when you hold it wrongly, or when you are doing too much manipulations, it can totally get disoriented, causing an intraocular IOL tilt on table itself. Or as you said, you can have acute bend or even a fracture of the haptic. So if it's a small bend, sometimes by pinching with a needle holder or a forceps, you can try to straighten it out and then tuck it into the intrascleral pocket. If it is too much bent and it's not able to straighten out, already partly fractured or totally fractured, you can just cut it off. But a small part is fractured, you have enough haptic length to tuck in, then you can go ahead with it. If there's a long part of the haptic is fractured or totally bent and totally disoriented, especially in the 3-piece PMMA IOLs with polypropylene haptic, then you may have to remove the IOL and reinsert a new IOL.
Right. Manmat, you have anything to point out or give as an input
No,
from Dr. Rupak's presentation?
No, nothing. No, it's fine. Actually,
Right,
Yamane technique is a little bit challenging. I have tried it once, but I gave up. So I better
the
stop
issue
to
with the
my own
Yamane
technique.
the specific needle which Yamane uses for his original technique, that needle is the track is very thin and 27 gauge needle, and the IOL when it's caught tight, it tends to stay nicely and snugly in that so-called tunnel. But most of us in India, we use routinely available 26 gauge and other large 24 gauge needles, some of them even use. So a lot of times the orientation is not good. There is a lot of tilting. Sometimes it can even dislocate into the partially or totally into the vitreous cavity. So all these issues are mainly related to the slightly larger needle tract compared to the original 27 gauge needle used by Yamane in Japan. So you can still access that specific needle which Yamane uses, but a little bit more expensive and not easily available. You may have to there are suppliers, but who supply this specific needle which Yamane himself used in his original technique.
Even Saria's techniques, he uses a complete set of forceps. Actually, he uses both curved and straight forceps. He uses particularly, and it is available. It is available in Med1. It is available. Saria's forceps.
Yeah, but if it's done well, I mean, like Saravanan sir mentioned a while back, with a sutured IOL technique, with sutured SFIL technique, perhaps even if you've not gone wrong anywhere during the procedure, just because of the suture material, it might just get eroded and might just get subluxated or totally dislocated over a period of time. We just hope that patients who are elderly and still have it, maybe they would, I mean, the suture would outlive the patient's life per se. But otherwise, talking about the stability part, since we are just utilizing the haptic in the Yamanis technique, perhaps it has an edge. But as you rightly mentioned, Manmat, it has a steep learning curve, and we don't get to see, I mean, get patients of this nature so that frequently. So maybe just to overcome that, I mean, flatten this steep curve, we don't have that kind of an exposure. And as Saravanan sir mentioned, probably we don't have the associated structures or associated equipments like in the form of needles, just for the sake of that. Right, so we come to the last talk of the session, and then we would take up discussion for whatever remainder time we have before the conclusion of the session, which would be from Dr. Saravanan, who is the head of VR services, Aravind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore. Sir, the background of yours shows Aravind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore surely, and I can see that the structure has actually assumed a celestial look from the time that I had been there for my routine ROP posting during my fellowship at Madurai. It has actually, there have been floors added, and I think there's a complete revamp to the external look as well. It's looking beautiful in the background, standing tall. So Dr. Saravanan is going to speak to us on the intra-op and post-op complications of IOL placement in cases where there is no posterior capsular support. Off to you, Dr. Saravanan.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the introduction. I hope you're able to see my slides, view my slides.
Yes, sir, we can. We can.
So mainly when an anterior segment surgeon is doing all these procedures, inserting the IOL, there is something which they don't want to see. And when you see a sinking IOL or a sinking nucleus, the surgeon's heart itself sinks actually. This is what we don't want to see, and we dread, most of the anterior segments dread these complications. So, and sometimes when you have a sinking nucleus or IOL, a lot of times you see people trying to what I call salvage the situations by inserting crude instruments and trying to remove them. So it's like removing the vada from the oil. It's not easy because it's a totally floating structure. You're trying to remove all these things. You're disturbing the vitreous too much, and as already Dr. Sanghamitra pointed out, it's like it's not easy to catch a fish. Like it's very difficult because there's no stabilizing structures. So what can happen is one of our cases where we have a sunken nucleus and the doctor is trying to use the Vectis to remove it. But she had some doubts that she had injured, because even though it looks very anterior, but once you see that when you put the cataprosthesis in and go inside, we could make out a retinal tear in the periphery. These are some of the complications which you can expect intraoperatively during these gruesome manipulations. So whenever you have some situation where the IOL is totally out of your view, trying to blindly salvage and remove it by using all these Vectis and other instruments is going to do more harm than good. So this is the same case where you can see that that's the tear there, where the nucleus was just sitting there. So the Vectis had gone a little bit too deep, and we have an injury because of direct touch. We have seen cases where the posterior port itself has been injured, where people have been very vigorous. So this is one thing I wanted to point out: when the nucleus has gone beyond your view, always resist from doing this. This is one more case where you can see that the Vectis injury is just at the inferior arcade. So this led to a significant branch retinal artery occlusion. You can see the whitening. These are some. This is all torn retina. They had gone too much deep inside. You can see the extensive, large, giant retinal tear, which is almost more than 200 degrees of the retina. Is the residual bits inside still after removing all these manipulations. So any anterior segment surgeon, when they see that the nucleus is out of their view, it's better to close the wound, salvage the anterior chamber by doing proper vitrectomy and cortex wash, and always refer it to the concerned VR surgeon. You can see that there's a turned flap of the giant retinal tear. So we had a difficult time salvaging, even though we could attach the retina. Because of the BR AVO, still the vision was only 360 in this particular patient. So this is one we don't want to see. So whenever you have such a complication, when the IOL is gone out of your view or lens is gone out of the view, you always stop, plan, and proceed. Whether you feel it can be salvaged. And first thing is to maintain the anterior chamber. When there is vitreous prolapse, the IOL or the nucleus is going to sink much more deeper into the vitreous cavity. So as the vitreous comes out, the nucleus tends to go down. So always close the larger section, whichever is there, and try to go through snugly fitting paracentesis side ports, where you can use either a dry vitrectomy using visco or a separate infusion undercutter, so that there is as little disturbance of the vitreous as possible. So one small pointer as regards to what are the cutting parameters you should use when you are doing for anterior segment surgeons. So depending upon whatever gauge you use, you just double the numbers. Use the maximum cut rate available, and the vacuum will be 150, 300, and just double. From 20, it's 150. From 23, it's 300. Double that to 600 for 25. So whatever gauge vitrectomy you are using, just 150, 300, and 600 using the maximum cut rate. It's a simple rule where you can assess what cutting. This will be the least damaging to the tractional damage to the retina. So when you should keep your hands off is when the nucleus is gone totally down. Some people try to flush out the nucleus by doing a deep anterior vitrectomy and used forced hydration of the eye, injecting a very forceful jet into the vitreous cavity to float up the sunken IOL or the sunken nucleus. All these things should not be attempted. Flushing is not for the eye, only for the toilets. But one thing what you can do is posterior levitation. When the nucleus is just in your view, just the tip of the lens or IOL or nucleus is seen, you can enter through a bent 26 jar needle through the 3 mm from the limbus and try to levitate the lens IOL or the lens into the anterior chamber and try to address that. This can be done when the view is still there, when within the view, the dropped nucleus or dropped IOL is still within your view. So the prolapse, once you know that the PC is, there are some parts of the rim which is stable. Either you can remove the IOL and reinsert by injecting visco and, into the sulcus, or you can prolapse it into the AC if it's foldable and then try to redial into the sulcus onto the remnant of the anterior or posterior capsule. So this assessment can be done by injecting visco and trying to retract the iris and look at the peripheral this thing. Sometimes using external light can provide a little bit more detail. You can use iris scope, Googlin's iris push pull, or even iris retractors to do this. So once you are confident that the rim support is good, then you can always reinsert or redial the IOL into the sulcus. And if there is no rim, always plan for a scleral fixed IOL. This is a case of freshly dropped nucleus referred from the anterior segment surgeon. So in our hospital, we try to do it in the same sitting immediately after it drops. You can see here the section is still fresh, and we are trying to create. This is a modified Gabos technique, where instead of a needle track, I use the 1.3 keratome, Arolab keratome which we have. So this already went in angle, nice angle for us to navigate. Make the initial first cut with the 15 blade and then use the 1.3 keratome. You also have Mani's blade, which has a 1.1, 1.2, whichever is suitable for you. This is Arolab's 1.3 keratome. It's already pre-bent to that particular angle. A little bit blunt compared to the Mani's blade, Japanese Mani's blade, but whatever, it's quite cheap actually. So these, instead of a needle track in typical Gabos technique, it's a sort of a modified Gabos technique. Because the Gabos sometimes you need to use that Chang's bent forceps to reinsert these IOLs, especially a straight forceps is difficult to do it in deep sockets. So I prefer to do this pockets, still pockets, so that I can use the routine McPherson forceps to tuck the IOL haptic into the scleral pocket. So we are making a transscleral sclerostomy for the haptic to externalize the haptic. We make a 24 gauge needle is used to make this entry into the vitreous cavity. Here, this is the IOL which is dropped down. So luckily, it's a 3-piece IOL, so we need not do anything special. We just have to redial the, reinsert this IOL into the scleral pocket which you have made. So just once that we just capture the IOL tip by using a 25 gauge McPherson forceps from Alcon Gushaber catalog. So just this is removed out of the externalized through this entry which you made. both after externalizing both the haptics. So both the haptics are now externalized and using a McPherson. So mainly this modification is mainly to prevent using the bent Chang's forceps or the other forceps. Straight forceps is a little bit difficult, especially in sunken globes, as I mentioned. This is a routine McPherson forceps which I use to tug it into the so-called pocket which are made using the 1.3 character. So if it's not totally dropped into the vitreous cavity, you can still do this by the anterior segment here. And a lot of times we see that our hospital anterior segments do this technique. So it's not totally sunken into the vitreous cavity. They can bring it up and do this on table itself on their own. You just have to hold the exact tip using a McPherson, a nice McPherson where the prongs are nicely aligned, and then reinsert into the tunnel. So it stays very well. It's essential to keep the IOL, intraocular pressure of the eye normal by using an anterior chamber maintainer. So otherwise it tends to move around. So it's very important. This is one of the older cases where we used to do the. This case, you can see that there is a dropped CTR. So they dialed the CTR and the CTR went down and they stopped the surgery there. So normally you can remove the CTR in toto also if you have a larger section, and if you have difficulty, you can always use a 25 gauge scissors to cut it into 2 pieces and remove it as 2 pieces. It's a little bit more safer. But whichever feels comfortable in your hand, you can do that also. So once you do this, then the reverse tunnel, which Dr. Manmat showed in his video, this reverse tunnel, doesn't bleed that much normally. So I use the routine crescent blade to make these reverse pockets, Hoffman's pockets, and using the 90 Prolene, you can railroad it into the so 2 long-armed 90 Prolene switches are used, and then brought it out. And as Dr. Manmat showed, it is tied on to the haptics of the specifically modeled skill-fixed IOLs. And I use a specialized hooks to remove the sutures from the tunnel and bring it into the open. So this is actually a old Sinskey hook which I have slightly bent upon to my knee to bring out the 90 Prolene sutures out of the tunnel to knot it. So anyway, and, I'm not using these techniques nowadays because, as I told you, it's late onset complication about 10-15 years. This is again one more one-eyed patient where both eyes coloboma and the other had a retinal detachment. And this I had, he was doing well for around a few months, and then IOL went inside. Actually, there were 2 CTRs in this eye. The surgeon had attempted to place 2 CTRs. So one CTR you can still see here, the shadow should be. And this is one more 1.5 character which is available from a local company. So a little bit more space to maneuver your McPherson, whichever you feel is comfortable in your hands. So there's one haptic is still sitting in the sulcus, nicely fixed there. But one more haptic and one IOL are inside the vitreous cavity. So I can see I'm trying to slip the CTR blade into 2 separate pieces, and using a cornel section tunnel and moving the pieces individually. And you can see now the sulcus, the 3-piece IOL is sitting in the colobomatous cavity. So that is now brought out, and the haptics are the second CTR piece coming out. And then the IOL is held out and brought into the external. The haptics are externalized and then tucked into the. So you can see the haptic holding the haptic using the 25 gauge McPherson max grip forceps, and then after externalizing both the haptics, just have to insert this using your McPherson forceps. It's quite simple actually. You can see there's still one CTR still sitting in the sulcus. It was quite stable, so I didn't attempt to remove that. So one night I didn't want to create too much traction forces and create a post-operative RD. So luckily nothing happened in this particular patient. So this is one more case where late onset decentration. It's a traumatic cataract. As you can see, there's a lot of injury to the trauma during the first surgery. Again, so this is not totally gone down, so it's very easy to manipulate this. The same technique where you make that tunnels using the 1.3 or 1.5 character, and then you can just bring out these haptics, hold it using 2 double handshake technique using 2 McPherson max grip 25 gauge max grip forceps, and then externally haptics, and then tuck it into the tunnels which you already saw in the previous video. So using McPherson in these tunnels is not very difficult. It's quite easy actually. So other complications you have to keep in mind is hyphema, which can happen intraoperative due to the manipulations. If there is a intraoperative hypotony, it can bleed from the angles or because of injury to the iris during your surgical procedure. Usually, by increasing the intraocular pressure, you can stop it. But if it's very significantly bleeding, especially if there is NVA, you can always cauterize. We use the intraoperative cautery, which we use for our retinal surgeries. Postoperative with a minimal hyphema, you can always just observe for it to absorb. If it is persisting or if there is glaucoma, you can always go for a wash. Vitreous hemorrhage, again, it can happen, but usually these are very minimal and does not need intervention, and it can resolve on its own. But in case it is causing secondary gross cell glaucoma, or if it's persisting for a long time, or if you're suspecting RD on ultrasound, you may have to intervene and then deal with RD if it is there. One rare complication which you are always worried about is in high myopic eyes is the presence of hemorrhagic choroidal detachment. So in these cases, you will see that there's auto expression of the nucleus or IOL and vitreous. You see the difference in the posterior reflex and tense globe. So first thing is to always close the wound. Sometimes you see that the intraoperative BP is very high in this wound, which can be the risk factor. So always try to check the BP and treat accordingly. And postoperatively, after closing the wound, you can go for IOP lowering and steroids, drugs and steroids. Usually, I don't like to intervene on the day itself because the bleeding can be quite uncontrollable. So once give a time of at least 7 to 10 days for the blood to rise, you can see this in ultrasound by the uniform echoes in the suprachoroidal space.
We can drain anteriorly for angle closer.
So CD drainage, you can either do it anything from 3 to 4 millimeters from the limbus to near the muscle incision at around 5 to 6 millimeters also. Just make a transcleral entry, expose the suprachoroidal space, and the blood will, altered blood will start pouring out on its own. So this is the old technique which we used to do by doing a open cut. But nowadays we have the 25 gauge and 23 gauge cannulas. So it's for hemorrhagic CD, I usually prefer the 23 gauge because sometimes small clots will not pass through the 25 gauge cannulas. So you have to partially insert these cannulas into the suprachoroidal space, and manipulation will see that the altered blood is coming. This is hemorrhagic. This is a serous CD, and this again, this hemorrhagic CD which is coming out. You can see the blood is pouring out through this. So hemorrhagic CDs can be drained, but I usually wait. I don't try to attempt in the same sitting. Serous CDs, usually intraoperative is very unusual, but sometimes because you're inserting your esophageal forceps and there's an unintentional cyclotaxis cleft, you can see intraoperative serous CD, but usually it's self-limiting. Postoperative is more common because of hypotony. So that is not usually a big issue. So ensuring the intraocular pressure rises by doing proper suturing of the leaked wounds, that is itself will be enough to take care of this. If there is a cyclotaxis cleft, you can do laser or cryo, or you can do a suturing or a buckle if it is very severe. Serous CD, as I said, you do not drain it unless if you have a lenticular keratolenticula touch. So otherwise it is not needed to address these. It will resolve on its own once you ensure that the wounds are nicely tight. RDs, again, as I told you, unless there's excessive manipulation intraoperatively, you can get genital tear, which I showed in the previous videos. When you're trying to fish blindly under the iris beyond your visible field, then you can get all these complications. Again, it's noted by the altered reflex. Sometimes people have been trying to pull the anteretinal flap, thinking it's the capsular remnant. You should always make sure that what you're dealing with is the right structure. So if you're doubtful, you can always try to see indirect on table and then manage accordingly. So sutured macular edema, again, nothing special. First thing, especially after complicated surgery, if you're having a CME, first thing you have to notice is there any surgically correctable causes, like vitreous in the wound, IOL malposition, mobile IOL causing rubbing motion on the iris causing chronic inflammation and all those things, or haptic in the AC. So always look for any correctable surgical reasons. If it is there, always do that. If it is not there, then you can routine treatment by steroids and NSAIDs will be adequate. And endophthalmitis, again, nothing special. Whenever there's a PC rent, always there's a higher risk of infection. So routine protocol, trace an AC tap, and try to identify the offending organism, and then treat accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saravanan sir, for bracketing a lot of aspects of intraop and postoperative complications. The PMMA lenses that you mentioned, the anterior segment surgeons in your institute also are able to externalize. are they this normal single piece PMMA IOLs or they're specially made? I'm asking because I wish to know the dimensions, number one. And number two, how easy or difficult is it to externalize a rigid haptic out of the eye into the scleral surface?
All 3-piece IOL, not single-piece PMMA. These are all 3-piece IOLs with the polypropylene. It is a little bit more pliable compared to the single piece. The single piece tends to break off. So the 3-piece polypropylene is not a big issue.
And I think the overall diameter is also a little more. I think it's a 12.5 mm, if I remember correctly, because they come from the house of Aurolab. Am I right, sir? Yeah. So we don't get it very commonly out here, but yes, I mean, they're excellent lenses when it comes to sulcus fixation in particular. Manmat, anything to ask Dr. Saravanan regarding his presentation or otherwise? We have around 5 minutes left, so we can utilize his presence out here.
Yeah, nothing in particular. Actually, I have tried Yamane technique, but still. Do we get Yamane needles, sir, in India, Dr. Saravanan, sir?
I don't think so. It has to be imported from Japan. I don't think any company in India is making a specific 27 gauge Yamanese needle which he utilizes. I usually do not myself do Yamanese technique, but people who have done mainly had issues because of the larger bore of the needle which we are using. So,
yeah, I've seen some people are using they bend 26 gauge needle to puncture the sclerotomy, and then they are trying to pull it through the by 25 gauge forceps.
yeah.
But it's not actually Yamane technique, it's modified Yamane technique.
Modified Yamane. Yeah. Originally Yamane, they removed both these haptics simultaneously, but if you look at all the videos, most of them do it as each as separate.
Yeah.
It's probably not the truly speaking, not the purest Yamanese technique.
Yes. But again, but we have to, if you have to do pure Yamane technique, bilateral, so at the time of feeding a trailing haptic, we have to seek the help of one assistant, because
definitely Yamanese technique cannot be done without the assistant's help.
Yes.
I think taking a cue from what Dr. Rupak showed us, I think we saw in his video that he not only externalized the advancing haptic, he also actually tried to cauterize and make a small flange so that it does not slip back into the eye before he externalized the trailing haptic. So
video, one assistant was holding the haptic, if I'm right.
Yes, he was, but in addition, he also applied a light cautery. So the flange was made even before externalizing the other haptic. So maybe just an extra protection that you make absolutely sure that it doesn't slip back.
Canabrava has advocated that you can, while injecting the foldable IOL, you can directly feed the tip of the leading haptic into the tip of the Yamane needle.
Yeah,
that is one his modification. That instead of trying after unfolding, you trying to push the haptic into the needle, you directly during injection itself, you directly feed the leading haptic into the cavity. So these are modifications. But anything at the end of the day, whatever works in your hand is best. So
I used to be very, very happy in the earlier days, but I'm seeing quite a few late, I mean, not 5-6 years. It's happening after 10 years. The recent case was almost 15 years back. So long-term survival of the suture, I mean, the biodegradability and the stability of the suture is a question here.
I was always wary of non-availability of Gore-Tex in India, sir. But as you said, maybe I can also get in touch with.
Gore-Tex is available.
It doesn't come as single sutures. It comes as, I think, 10 or 20 pack. Even though single comes around 1,500 to 2,000, less than 2,000 only. But you have to buy as a single pack. I mean, single box rather. So it doesn't come as single suture. That's the only problem with this, because probably unless you are doing suture, otherwise the use is less. In our hospital, we try to buy it and distribute among other centers, so that way it's okay. But I think it's okay. I mean, not a big issue.
And Gore-Tex is used routinely in cardiovascular surgery. So if you are working in a general hospital also, you can probably borrow it from your cardiovascular colleague.
In case you have a colleague who you know very well, definitely you can get a single pack. It's quite cheap.
And they are expensive sutures. They are expensive. Gore-Tex is expensive.
Not expensive, sir. We are using it here. One suture is very cheap. It comes to less than 2,000 only. Because you have to buy as a bulk. It comes as in a piece of a box of, I think, 20, I think. So it becomes expensive.
So which gauge of the suture that you use, Gore-Tex, is it 70?
80, it doesn't come below 80, sir. So it's quite thick. Quite thick, actually.
Very thick.
Yeah, that weight is very thick.
Even Canabrava has also showed us a YouTube video where he uses 60 Prolene, sutures instead of Gore-Tex.
Okay.
60 Prolene is also very thick suture.
Yeah.
It is thick, and I don't have experience with 6-0, but I do have experience with 5-0, and 5-0 Prolene is very difficult to knot. It's okay for an external scleral based and muscle based surgeries. We do blow fixations with that. But even then, it is very, I mean, once you super add knot after knot, it becomes very bunchy as a mass.
Any
And
more
it's-
suture which goes beyond 80, I mean 90, beyond 80, it becomes very difficult to knot.
Right, sir. I think we have the company of participants of the next session, and I think we're just about time. It's 4:25, so it's been a fabulous last 85 minutes in the esteemed company of both of you. Dr. Rupak and Dr. Sanghamitra, of course, left a little prematurely. So I think the participants who have watched this session would have loved to experience the work of some of the greatest names in the field of vitreoretina in India. If you've got any suggestions or any inputs from your side, we're always happy to receive them and address them if possible. So thank you so much. In these difficult times, we all do a Karo Namaskar from a distance, and wishing you all that you all stay safe and healthy and hearty. So thank you so much, Saravanan sir. Thank you so much, Manmath. It's been wonderful in your company. So we sign off here and over to the next session in Hall Palicaris. Signing off. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Moderation by Dr. Anurag Mishra and fantastic presentations by all the speakers. Let's have a huge round of applause for the entire team of this session, ladies and gentlemen.